Hi there. Welcome back to Kari's Confessions, a nonprofit exec tells all. I'm Kari Anderson, principal with Insight Consulting. Thanks for joining me today. So for those of you who have not yet dabbled with this particular podcast, I wanted to share a little about me. I am a recovering nonprofit executive director. I had the good fortune of serving in the field for about 25 years, 7 different organizations in Washington State and Colorado. And now I have the good fortune of working behind the scenes with nonprofits all over the United States, ensuring that you have the support, systems, and best practices to fulfill your missions and do your best work. So today's topic is something that is just near and dear to my heart, and that is the idea of the executive director board chair dance. I think back to all of the board chairs that I worked with during my tenure, and I certainly have favorites and not so favorites. And one of my favorite things now is working with both of those entities to ensure that during their time together, they can work the best possible ways together as a team. And it's also given me lots of time for reflection in my almost 10 years of consulting. Think back about, what role did I play that was beneficial in a great and healthy relationship with my board chairs? And where, frankly, did I miss the mark in terms of my roles and responsibilities when I was sitting in that particular position? So my hope is, today is a little bit of therapy for me and therapy for you as we talk through how you can kind of assess the current state of your relationship, whether you're the board chair or whether you're the executive director, and how you might be able to work differently with your partner and in propelling the organization forward. So 3 things, right, that I'd kind of like to, I guess, put our topics into today, 3 buckets. 1, the importance of staying in our lane. 2, some tips certainly to give to the both of you or one of you as you move your relationships forward. And 3, the idea that this is certainly a team sport, right? This isn't a one or the other. It's both of you in ensuring that both the organization's work and the board work is done in the most efficient and impactful manner. So I'm going to share with you quickly a story of when I was a younger executive director. And my board chair, that was probably the most impactful individual in my entire nonprofit career. His name is Kari Norman, and he's a litigation attorney in Denver, Colorado. And when I was a young executive at the American Heart Association there, I had probably been there for about 3 weeks. And he had called and asked for a meeting with me and had shared some feedback with me that I would say was difficult to hear for sure. And one of the pieces of feedback was that I was running around like a chicken with my head cut off. And I managed to hold the tears in and managed to squeak out, can you help? And we got to some of the helping in terms of time management later. But I will tell you, when a board chair cares enough about the organization and the individual to offer some pretty specific feedback, but also wants to help you, it's a life-changing experience. And I had a really phenomenal year with Kali, with him doing some significant mentorship for me as a younger leader. I share that because in this sector, oftentimes staff have a habit of blaming our boards, right? I was just it's nonprofit conference season, and I was at 3 different conferences this fall. And certainly, though we've gotten better at this, the chatter always is, the challenges of the board. They're not fundraising. They focus their time on the wrong issues. They aren't engaged, et cetera, et cetera. Well, where this ends up usually starting is the relationship between the executive director and the board chair. So when you think about this, right, the executive director, the conduit for the organization, anything that's having to do with the operations, the executive director is the head of. And the board chair leads the board. So this interface, right, between the board chair and the executive director is so important to ensure that everyone is on the same page about whose work is what and why, and making sure that there's information that's flowing back and forth that supports everyone, right? So this is a quick test, for you to think through in your head. Do you know who's responsible for what, right? And the short story is the board's responsible for setting strategic direction for the organization, serving as a risk manager for the organization, making sure there's financial oversight, making sure that they serve as a fiduciary of funds raised, hiring, supporting, and evaluating your executive director, right? That's the role of the board. And the role of the executive director is to make sure that the mission of the organization is implemented and executed. If you don't have staff, right, then the board has to do both. And that's a heavy lift. That's what we often have to do. So when you've got, right, a separation of those duties, it's really important to make sure that that's articulated often, so that people don't inadvertently end up micromanaging. So this gets to the whole adage of staying in your lane. It's so important, whether you're an executive director who's just moved to a different organization, or a board chair who's used to have served on a different board but is new to this particular organization. Make sure you are having the conversation about where are we in our life cycle, right? So we can make sure that everyone is clear about what exactly the board and board members are responsible for, especially if the organization is smaller. So having clearly defined roles support accountability, and they certainly encourage responsibility. If we've got clearly defined roles and responsibilities, that helps to strengthen overall relationships, and it absolutely helps with building trust. And that's often the death knell, right? Between board chairs and executive directors, as there's been trust lost. But that comes over time. It's because we haven't been focused on building that relationships. So I think back to lessons I learned when I was in the field. Man, I wish I had do-overs with probably 3 of the organizations I worked on or worked for. I hadn't been given great training in terms of how important this particular role was with my board chair. And so certainly these are things that I have learned, and more importantly, things I have observed are really healthy executive director and board chair relationships. So the first is there's got to be a commitment to build that relationship. I know this might seem obvious to some of you, but I think we all take healthy relationships for granted. And we know that they take time to build, especially when we're dealing with trust and rapport and open and honest communication. And open and honest communication is tougher with folks that you don't know. So you've got to be able to spend the time to be able to build that relationship. And as that relationship builds, then you're able to build trust. Well, how do we do that, right? We follow up after meetings in a timely manner. We call when if you said you're going to call at a certain time, right, you're going to call then. You respond promptly to emails. Don't get me started on executive directors that I know. I literally saw an email box the other day where she had 14,000 emails in it. Or another executive director who takes weeks to respond to her board chair. Like, that's just not how you build trust. We've got to respond in an appropriate time period. And when I was in the field, it was 48 hours. Ideally, it's 24. You may not have the answer that they're looking for, but you absolutely are committed to letting them know, hey, I got your message. I can't get to this right now, but I will get to it at this point in time. Be honest if you don't know or you don't have the answer, but be committed to finding out. That's how people know that you can roll with them, right? How else do we possibly build this relationship? Well, we certainly work on communicating effectively. And this is how we make it a priority to sit down with all new board chairs to ask, what do they need from you as a leader? How can you best support them? How do they like to be communicated with? Is it email? Is it text? Or is it phone? Encourage them to ask you those same questions, right? So what a great grounding first meeting with your new board chair, and asking really specific questions about how do we work best together so that we can support each other's best work. Here's something that's going to irritate the dickens out of at least half of you that are tuning in today. People, if you have a board chair, you have got to meet with them on a regular basis, one-on-one. I prefer once a week. And I know some of your eyes are rolling right now, right? Some of you are thinking, man, if I can see this person once a month, I'm lucky. Or I don't want to see this person once a month. This is your obligation, right? And when you think about what's supposed to happen at this meeting, dedicated to open, honest conversation, problem solving, and team building, right? So if you, executive director, are the conduit of information from your organization, and the board chair is the conduit of information from the board, why wouldn't you want to have a conversation on a regular basis, right? And when I think about what should be talked about, what kinds of things, so think of a board meeting as a 30,000 foot conversation, right? The plane has taken off. There's no turbulence. You're flying along like you're up here, big picture stuff. When you and your board chair are meeting, it's 10,000 foot stuff, right? It's not in the weeds. That's a little deeper dive into particular pieces of information. And it's under the adage of you should never surprise the board and the board should never surprise you. So if you're having a regular conversation with your board chair, that ensures that the information is dispersed to where it needs to go, right? So can this meeting be via phone? Sure. Could be via Zoom? Sure. Is it best in person? Absolutely, right? Because we're in the business of people. I understand if you've got a regional or national organization that that's probably not going to happen as much as in person. What matters is that you're actually having the conversation and that you've committed to that time together. So I think oftentimes about what we may need to do, right, executive directors, to make sure that this regular interface is not a surprise to individuals who are being elected into this role. I oftentimes hear, oh my heavens, I had no idea that this was an expectation of me in this role. Well, we need to stop surprising them. I think in terms of other tips and tools that you can use to build a healthy and strong relationship between the two of you, acknowledging your own strengths and opportunities for growth. So you really can't fake it until you make it with the board chair and directors, and lack of experience and knowledge certainly shows. We didn't come out of the womb understanding how to run a nonprofit, right? No doubt about that. But we absolutely have to acknowledge where perhaps we don't have an area of expertise. And then there needs to be a commitment from the board to ensure that there are professional development funds that are set aside for you to grow in those areas, right? That's the deal. They've got to be able to support you there. So I would like to just kind of end today by reminding you that building a healthy relationship between the ED and the board chair requires vulnerability, courage, self-awareness, and commitment to implement, right? It's not going to be perfect. What matters is that, that there's a commitment and there's consistency in this work, because all ships rise, right, when the both of you are committed to doing this, both the work of the organization and the work of the board. If you're looking for additional resources that can support you with this, whether that's a draft agenda for our board chair, executive director, regular meeting, whether that's a clarity of roles document that helps explain whose role is what at the organization, hit me up on my website, insightconsultinggroup.com. There's an email right there on the homepage for you, and you can shoot off what you might need in terms of support from me. And I'll look forward to seeing you next time on your favorite podcast channel. Have a great week. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.